Now, why did Samurai 8 fail? After Kishimoto finished wrapping up Naruto, finishing all the side stories that led into Boruto, he began working on his own original sci-fi fantasy manga, and most everyone knows this by now because it has been officially cancelled. Now, this manga did run from May 13th, 2019 up until March 2020, so it just had a little under a year of its runtime. So it did have a decent amount of issues, or chapters before it did get cancelled, and I think that this is really due to just having Kishimoto's name on it. I think that it got some extra runtime when it would have been canceled a lot sooner if Kishimoto had not been involved. But yeah, of course, everyone knows why a series gets canceled with Shonen Jump. It's just because it's not making numbers, it's not selling well enough, and that's actually a really good business model to go off of, even if it does seem really harsh. But I wanted to get into why I think the series wasn't selling well, not really how it wasn't selling well, because we already know how it's not making numbers, but why wasn't it making those numbers? Now, first up, I have the art. Now, the art was actually fine. It was pretty good, honestly, but it doesn't have that same feeling that we had in Naruto or series like Naruto that become really big. In those series, there's always that one panel that feels more impactful than any other panel, and it really draws you into the story, and you become enticed with all the characters and such. And I'm bringing this up because there's pretty much none of that within this entire series. I mean, I couldn't name a single impactful moment. There are some little things, especially within the first couple of chapters, that really brought me in. I stayed on it till about chapter 23, and then I think I dropped it. But overall, the art is fine. I don't want to really say that the art is bad by any means, especially technically speaking. The art is actually pretty fantastic. The backgrounds are very well detailed, and some of the character designs are pretty cool. But like I said, it doesn't have any of that impactful stuff that really invests you in the characters. So I do think it is something that played a pretty crucial role in why this series was not successful. Now, the second, we obviously have to talk about the story, and it's good in concept, but when it comes to its execution, it was atrocious in my opinion. It was one of the weakest aspects of this entire series. What makes me really appreciate so many shonen series is that they start off really simple, and then as time goes on, they grow more and more complex. And that's pretty much in all aspects, whether it's the characters, the story, the world building, they all just get more complex as the story progresses. You can see this really well in Hunter x Hunter. I mean, at the beginning, it really wasn't complex at all. But then you start getting into the magic system, and then the world and the characters, they all start to grow tremendously. And in this series, it really tries to throw it all at you at the very beginning, and that's one of its biggest flaws. It's just kind of overwhelming with pretty much everything. Now, the story, one of its biggest flaws is that it doesn't really have the focus in the series. If I would say anything had the focus, it's the magic system and the world building. Those two they have much more focus on them than the actual story itself. And then the characters, I still think, are placed above the story as well. But the characters do kind of intertwine, so I'd say that that's kind of one and the same, because the story is very much intertwined with Hachimaru, which is the case for most series because the main character is obviously the driving force behind the plot. Now, like I said, the series starts off and it's throwing everything at you, and that makes the plot pretty much slow to a very slow start. And you don't really get introduced to any cool or any interesting villains to pretty much throughout the entire manga run. I wouldn't say that there's any interesting villains. Even the later chapters where I kind of skimmed through, there were no villains that would even match to any of the weaker villains in Naruto. And I'm obviously going to compare Samurai to Naruto because of the same author, even though if it's not the same artist. But yeah, I think that's really all the time I want to spend on the story. Just to sum everything up in a couple of words, I think that if it would have focused more on progression rather than just throwing everything at you from the very start, this series could have went a lot differently. Now, thirdly, the characters. Now, the characters, they were surprisingly intriguing, and by them I mean the main characters, because the side characters surprisingly were complete, I don't want to say trash, but they were not very interesting. I mean, there was nothing really that, it's very different from Naruto in a sense that the side characters in Naruto, they were pretty much what drew you into the story even more. I mean, you liked Naruto, Sasuke, not really Sakura, but still you liked those two characters, And then once you start to meet people like Lee, like Neji, and then of course characters like Shikamaru, but pretty much I think you do get the point. The side characters in Naruto brought you into the story even more. But with this series, Samurai 8, it's not really the case. I would say it definitely took me out of the series because I didn't care about any of these side characters. I found them to kind of hinder my experience on the series. I just wanted to see Hachimaru's story, and was a great addition, especially working in tandem with Hachimaru. And then I think it's Daruma. He's not anybody like Jiraiya. I mean, in a sense that, you know, he's not on Jiraiya's level as a teacher or Kakashi or anything like that, but still he was a pretty enjoyable character. The whole cat twist and what happened with his character in the very beginning, it's still pretty interesting and helps add something to his character. But pretty much my biggest problem with the characters in this series is that the side characters and antagonists, I forgot to mention the antagonist, but there was just, they had no type of threat to them. Like, they didn't feel impactful in any sort of way. I'm saying impactful a lot because I think that's what the series didn't have, is it didn't have any impact into shonen at all. In Naruto, it definitely did. Or if I'm being honest, any shonen, any big shonen has to have a certain weight behind it, and Samurai 8, it didn't have any. So quick sum up, the antagonists and side characters were pretty much garbage. Now number 4, the magic system, and this is probably the only thing that I think was pretty much, I don't want to say flawless, but there's no real problems that I have with it because it's pretty simple in its nature and it was well executed, especially working in tandem with the art. It just looks really cool, and I think that you really can't ask anything more of a setup for a magic system. And I think that it was good because it didn't try and throw everything at you at one time. Sure, like they have their expositions where they explain the powers really in depthly when it's really not needed. At least at this time, you can spread it out more if you want to, but still, I think that the magic system in this manga was actually really cool and really well executed. So it's not really one of my problems, but I'd figure I'd at least talk about something positive really quick before I get into more negatives. Now, number 5, the world building. Now, the world building was actually phenomenal, or I want to say phenomenal, but it was pretty good, and that's kind of the problem because it took so much focus away from the story and the characters and stuff like that. It just took up way too much for how long the story actually was. I don't want to go on sounding like a broken record, so what they needed to do was start off slow, and then as time went on, just add a little bit more to it. That way you're not wasting so much of our time. So to finish everything off, if you haven't noticed already, the manga's biggest flaw is pacing and focus. The focus should always be, or at least in my opinion, the main focus should always be on the narrative and the characters, and then everything else is just an added bonus, because you can have a good narrative, a good characters, but then you can also have a bad magic system and mediocre world building, and it still be a pretty phenomenal story. But I feel like if the order is different than that, then it's really hard to have a good story, at least in my opinion. Now, of course, the pacing problems aren't just the artists and the writers' fault. It does have to do with the company itself, because they do pressure these guys into making changes. That way they could possibly get more sales. So I don't want to just outright blame Kishimoto for something that might not be his fault. But yeah, that's going to be pretty much it for me. Tell me what you guys thought in the comments below. Subscribe if you aren't already, and this is me signing out.